This morning, I think everybody is aware by now, is Paul Cartwright. I'm going to make a much bigger introduction of Paul before he preaches this morning, but I've known Paul since he was a teenager, and we've had a very rich friendship through the years, and I count it a blessing to have been a very, very small part of helping him in his growth and maturity as a minister. And we're so glad that he's here. He and his wife April and their daughter Emma have been here, of course, this weekend to look at the work here and for Paul to be considered for the preaching position. And so I'm not going to say any more right now. I'm going to present to you Paul Cartwright. Brother Paul.
Good morning. It feels strangely familiar to be back here this morning. It's good to see so many old friends. See some folks I had not known. You weren't here when I worked here, but it's good to be together this morning. I know that auditorium classes are not conducive always to great discussion, but we're going to do our best this morning to work through some text this morning. We're going to be looking at a very familiar text this morning. It is from Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. The title of this lesson is A Mother's Request, and I think once we get into our text this morning, you're going to see why that is the title of this lesson. Matthew chapter 20. We're going to kind of take this just in pieces this morning. We're going to look at some of the text, and then we're going to answer some questions, and then look at some more of the text. So Matthew chapter 20, beginning in verse 20, says, Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons, and kneeling before him, asked him for something. And he said to her, What do you want? She said to him, Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom. First thing that jumps off the page at me when I read this text is that mothers have not changed a lot since the time of Christ. Mothers love their children. Mothers love their sons. Oftentimes, I will run into somebody who's met my folks somewhere along the way. My folks live in East Texas and Palestine, Texas, and pre-COVID, sometimes people would run into them, and they'd hear my last name, and they'd put two and two together, and they'd say, I met your folks. And I'd tell them, only believe about half of what Mom said, because mothers love their sons. So who were the sons of Zebedee? You know, that sounds very impressive. It's the sons of Zebedee, but who were the sons of Zebedee? James and John. That's right, James and John. If we look at Mark 10:35, it says, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Now, this is very normal in the Bible times to identify somebody by who their father was. Sometimes they would even go further back. Sometimes you would hear someone called a son of David or a son of Abraham, and that was because in the Jewish culture, it was almost a status symbol to be able to read your lineage back all the way to one of those patriarchs, to someone like David or to someone like Moses. Now, ironically, in the New Testament, in the book of Titus, Paul tells people to not engage in vain genealogies. He tells people to not spend time doing things like that. And we see a shift in the culture from the Jewish culture to a Christian culture. But during the time of Christ, we haven't seen that shift yet. Because remember, pre-sacrifice on the cross, Jesus was a practicing Jew. He was a good Jewish man. He knew the law, he knew the prophets, and he lived a good Jewish life. And so, people would recognize, it was not uncommon to say, the sons of Zebedee. Why would a mother make such a request? She wants the best for her boys. I really have never met a mother that did not want the best for their children, did not want the best for their boys. And same goes for fathers as well. I am the father, as Rayford mentioned, of a lovely 10-year-old girl. Her name's Emma. You'll meet Emma a little bit later. She comes up to about here now. I can't believe how tall she's gotten. But I want the absolute best for my daughter. And so I might ask someone something that I wouldn't normally ask. I don't think that the mother of James and John would have made a request for someone else, but she made that request for her boys. This is from a commentary, but this is something that a commentator wrote, said she was assuming that Christ would be establishing an earthly kingdom, and traditionally, people in those positions would have the most power. There was a school of thought that Jesus was going to establish an earthly kingdom. There was a school of thought that Jesus was going to be a king like David was a king. And there was a school of thought that there was even going to be a militaristic tone to that kingdom. We see when Jesus is in the garden, when he is praying right before he goes to the cross, and they come to seize him. Do you remember what happens? Peter draws a sword and he cuts the ear off of the servant Malchus because he was ready for a military conflict. They were expecting a coup d'etat to happen and for Jesus to rule in this new kingdom. But of course, we know that that's not what Jesus intended. We know that the kingdom is not a militaristic kingdom. We know that the kingdom does not have a king, a monarch sitting on a throne here on earth. We know the kingdom is the church. We know that the kingdom is where we do our best work, and we do work for the kingdom. But there was a thought that there was going to be a more militaristic tone to Christ's reign. So what can we learn from how she made her request? There's a couple things we can look at this morning. The first thing is that she came kneeling before Jesus. Now, of course, this request is a bit ridiculous because he was not going to have this earthly kingdom or this militaristic kingdom, but she did go about making the request in a good way. She knelt before Jesus. If you were to go into Paul's letters, you would find that Paul has a prayer in the book of Ephesians, and he says, "For this reason I bow my knee before the Father who is in heaven, through whom everyone on earth was given their name." Bowing before God, either on your knees or bowing your head, showing reverence to God, is something that we need to do. We are here this morning to show reverence to God. We're going to come together soon and we're going to sing songs that give reverence to God. We're going to partake in the Lord's Supper, which is a memorial feast, and that's a way that we give reverence to God. We are examining God's Word this morning, and we hold God's Word in the highest of regards. And so when we come before God to make a request, it needs to be done so from a place of reverence. Does that mean that you have to physically get on your knees and make that request? I don't believe that you have to. I don't believe it's wrong if you want to. But we do need to show some kind of reverence. Sometimes it's good to help us to add a physical component when we ask God for something, and so that's why we bow our heads. That's why we fold our hands. That's why we might get down on our knees. I have known people that have rooms in their homes that they refer to as their prayer closet, that they go into. There is no electronics in there, there's no distractions in there, and they give God His proper place, and they show Him the proper reverence. And that's what was going on here. Kind of goes to that old adage that you can learn a positive lesson from maybe a mistake. It really wasn't appropriate for her to make this request of Jesus because He wasn't going to have this militaristic earthly kingdom. But the way she went about it was absolutely right. She went about it from a place of reverence. She went at it from a place of respect. And that's exactly how we should come before God when we make requests of God as well. Continuing in our text, we see that Jesus answered, "Do you not know? You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink my cup. But to sit at my right hand and my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." I love the relationship that Jesus has with God. I love the way that He holds His Father in such high esteem. My dad and I share the same first name. My dad's name is Paul Wayne Cartwright. My name is Paul Milner Cartwright. We have a different middle name, so I'm not a junior. But there are these people out there that are trying to buy up houses. They're trying to flip houses. You probably watch them on HGTV and things like that. Well, because my dad's legal name is Paul Cartwright, I often get calls from people asking me, Do you still own that house over on this street? Do you still own this property? And I tell them every time, no, that's my Father's property. The thought has crossed my mind to say, yes, I do own that, and here's how you can write the check to. But that wouldn't go over real well, I don't think. But I love how Jesus, who is in the very nature God, we read that in the book of Philippians, I love how Jesus lets them know that the request that they have made is not his to grant. He shows reverence to his Father, even though his Father trusted him with many things. Even though his Father and he were one, as we read in the Gospel of John, we see that Jesus gives God his proper respect as his Father. So why does Jesus refer to his destiny as a cup? That's not something you hear very often anymore. You don't hear people refer to an eventuality or a destiny as a cup. But why do you think Jesus refers to it as a cup? Don't feel bad, I had to look it up myself. He refers to it as a cup, there's a Greek word, and it is poterion, and it is a cup or a drinking vessel, literally, or it is a metaphor. One's lot or experience, whether joyous or adverse, divine appointments, whether favorable or unfavorable, are likened to a cup which God presents one to drink. So of prosperity and adversity. What was the cup that Jesus was going to drink? Don? Sure, go ahead. My cup overflows. Exactly. It's a very common metaphor. What was the cup? Yeah.
In the garden.
Yeah.
He asked the Father, take this cup from me.
Take this cup. The cup was the crucifixion. The cup was the sacrifice that Jesus was going to make. And again, we see such reverence from Jesus towards his Father God. He asks him, didn't tell him, didn't say, I don't want to do this. He asked him, if it is possible, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done. I think those of us who are children, and I do still consider myself a child, even though I'm in my 30s, I think we've had these moments with our parents where our parents have asked us to do something maybe we don't want to do, but we do it because they are our parents. I used to work at the Pearland Church of Christ. I worked there for 8 years. We moved there in 2008. And shortly after we moved to Pearland, we were right in the middle of Vacation Bible School. We were going to finish Vacation Bible School on Wednesday, and then Sunday we were going to leave to take the kids to Camp Bandina. And on Tuesday, my mother called me, and she said, your grandfather has passed away. My dad's dad had passed away. And keep in mind, I'm still very new at ministry at this point. I had just graduated a couple years before. Had not done a lot of preaching at that point. And so we started talking about, and they lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and we started talking about what the arrangements were going to be. We started talking about several different things, and Mom kept talking about, well, the funeral is going to be this day, and then we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we like to have this kind of service. And finally I said, Mom, who's preaching this funeral? And she goes, please don't make me ask you to do this. And I said, I'll preach the funeral. I didn't want to preach the funeral. I had never preached a funeral. I had preached one funeral, but I had never preached a funeral for a family member. I had not been very close to that grandfather. I didn't want to preach the funeral, but my mother needed me to preach that funeral. My father needed me to preach that funeral. And so I preached the funeral. I took that cup from them. I took that off of their shoulders. And I think there's something that we need to, there are some things that we are gifted to do. There are some cups that we are meant to drink. We're told in the book of Romans that we all have different gifts according to the Spirit, and we are to drink that cup. And so Jesus is telling these men that you can't drink the cup that I'm going to drink. You can't go to the cross, and you can't take on the sins of the world. Now, at this point in their relationship with Christ, they didn't quite understand what he was saying. They didn't know what he was going to do. In fact, I would dare say, until the resurrection, I don't think they fully understood what Jesus was saying here. Because when Jesus died, when they laid his body in the tomb, what happened to the apostles? They went back to what they were doing, didn't they? They went back to to fishing. They went back to what they knew. But yet when Jesus comes back from the grave, when he is resurrected, he shows them that he is the only one who was able to drink that cup. And that's an amazing thing about our Savior. What are some ways that we can fall into that same trap as the sons of Zebedee today? If you notice here, they're gung-ho. They're ready to go. He says, can you drink the cup? They said, sure, we can do that. So how do we fall into some of those same traps today? Remember that old song, anything you can do, I can do better? I think sometimes we fall into that trap sometimes. We know people that we love and that we care about, but because we want to save some face, because we want to look important, because we want to be better than that person, we try to do what they do. We try to do it better than they do. There is something to be said about giftedness. There is something to be said about someone who knows what they're doing and allowing them to do it. I used to do a fair bit of work around my mother's dad's ranch, and I loved to watch my grandfather swing an axe. I never saw anyone that could swing an axe like he could and chop wood. I loved to watch him drive fence staples with a hammer, mostly because it meant I didn't have to drive the fence staples into the cedar post. But every once in a while, I would decide I could do that. I could do that just as good as Papa, and I would get my hammer and I'd start just whacking away at that thing. And I'd bend the staple, I couldn't get it done right, and he would say, let the tool do its work. Don't force it. And there's so much wisdom in that. There is giftedness in this world. There's giftedness within this congregation. We need to recognize what people's individual gifts are. We need to recognize what people's individual purposes are, and we need to encourage them in those things. Instead of asking to sit the right and left hand of Jesus, what they should have been saying is, how can we help you? How, Lord, can we help pave the way? How can we do things to tell people about the good news? Now, granted, they didn't exactly know what was going to happen up until that point, but we should take a cue from them, and we should look at where people are gifted, what people are meant to do, and we should encourage them and help them to do those things instead of fighting with them, trying to take the spotlight. Understanding that Christ is not setting up an earthly kingdom, why was it still not Jesus' place to grant them what their mother asked? Kristen? Already decided? Kristen? Right. Right. I mentioned my parents, that they live on a cattle ranch, and I compare my dad to Abraham a lot of times. You know, in the book of Genesis, you've got Abraham. He's lived a good life. And of course, they lived a lot longer lives back then, but he's about 75 years of age, and God tells him, Abraham, I want you to go to a place that I'm going to show you, and you don't have any family there. And Abraham went. My dad retired from selling insurance for State Farm after 37 years, and it wasn't God that called him, but it was my mom that said, I want to go to a place that I'm going to show you, and it was a cattle ranch. And my dad went to that cattle ranch, and Dad has really grown into a very good rancher. Those cows love him. When he fires that truck up, they come running to him. He fixes fence, and he works on roads. He does all the things that a rancher does. But there are times when my brother and myself will go and we will help Dad do things. We'll help with the cows. We'll make decisions at times. And sometimes we'll have somebody ask us a question. They'll say, can I bring this piece of equipment and store it at your place? Can I do this? Can I do that? And our answer every time is, this is not our place. This is our Father's place and our mother's place. There is something to be said about the relationship of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. They work together, and yet they can work independently. And while Christ was equal with God, he did not consider equality with God anything to be grasped. We read that in the book of Philippians. And so he tells them, it is not my place to offer this to you. It is my Father's place to offer this to you. And I think there's such important lessons. There's so many layers of what we can see in there. There are times in ministry when people will say, oh yeah, he goes to your church. And I tell them, it's not my church. It's the Lord's church. I work for the Lord. I work for His church, but it's not my church. And yet sometimes I think we try to get very possessive about the building and things like that when we need to realize that it's all what God has blessed us with, and we need to make decisions that will glorify God. And so there's also the idea of physical parentage and children. We also, if you live long enough and your parents live long enough, there's going to be a time when there's going to be a bit of a role reversal. I can remember the first time that I had to help in a way more like a parent than a child. My mother had broken her leg. They had brought her back to Houston so they could go to her orthopedist. Her and Dad had not slept for 24 hours. I met them at the doctor's office, and Dad handed me the clipboard. He said, fill out your mother's information, please. And it was a difficult thing to be trusted with that. Now, while my dad trusted me with that, I was not, at the end, responsible for her care. My dad was responsible for that. But he trusted me with those things. It's important to know where we stand. It's important to know what our roles are. Parents, it's all right to communicate that to your children. Let them know what their roles are. Children, it's okay to ask your parents what your role is and to have that conversation. We continue on, we'll see. In Mark 10:40, it says, but to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. That decision was already made. It wasn't Jesus' decision to make. And that gives so much freedom in our lives. When a decision that has already been made, you don't have to make that decision. And we need to keep that in mind as we live our lives. As we continue in our study, it says, and then the 10 heard it, and they were indignant at two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. I shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Did the other 10 disciples have the right to be indignant? Daniel? Yeah, they were still thinking physical kingdom. They were still thinking like, well, wait a minute, are we going to have to go work in the kitchen? I mean, what are we going to do in this leadership structure? So their mindset wasn't exactly right. But I think we've all experienced this, haven't we? We think that someone is trying to get a position that we think that we deserve, and we become indignant at that. We become offended. Something I have noticed, especially within the last year, people get offended really easily these days. I mean, it just does not take anything to set people off. I read a book a couple of years ago written by a talk show host, radio talk show host out of Florida. He is a follower of Christ. Theologically, we don't line up, but he wrote a book called Unoffendable. And in that book, he talked about this very instance. He talked about how they became offended. I want to tell you something. We waste a lot of time being offended. We waste a lot of time being indignant towards other people. And what surprises me is that at this point in Jesus' ministry, he's pretty far into his ministry. These disciples have seen him do some pretty amazing things at this point. Why in the world did they not give Jesus a chance to explain himself before they got indignant? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Human nature. I think that's the real key there, Rayford, is that we do the same thing. We a coworker of mine used to call it the ready, fire, aim method of doing things. You know, we get so upset, we get this big head of steam, and we are going to have justice over this. I want to tell you something. You better be glad that Christ didn't give you justice. You better be glad that Christ extended mercy and grace. We ask, we say, well, my rights, I have been wrongly accused. I want justice. I want this. Christ didn't come to give us justice. He came to give us mercy and grace. And that's essentially what he's talking about here. He's talking with these disciples about things that are going to happen. They just don't know about it yet. I oftentimes wonder if the disciples look back later in life and they think that they just missed the boat sometimes. I just wrapped up a series where I work in Dallas over the letter of 1 John. If you haven't read 1 John in a while, go read 1 John. But I would also encourage you to read the Gospel of John concurrently when you read 1 John. Because what you're going to see is that the letter of 1 John is the marinating of the lessons of Christ that have happened all those years. John has had all this time to think about and to reflect on what Jesus said, and it's a much more mature person writing that letter. And I believe that these disciples, when they look back on this, they probably were a bit ashamed of themselves, that they were arguing about who was going to sit at the right hand, who was going to sit at the left hand. But the wonderful thing about Christ is Christ didn't hold this against them. He didn't make them feel bad. He didn't lord this over him. He talks about that here in this passage. And he doesn't lord things over us. He doesn't hold things over us like an earthly master might. So how do we sometimes repeat this mistake, and how can we avoid this mistake? How do we repeat the mistake? Having too much pride. The Proverbs tells us that pride goes before the fall, and that's absolutely true. I have a friend, and he's a funny guy. And right before Christmas, he started posting all these things. He was going to visit with his family. He was going to be there, and he kept saying, kind of needling his sister. He kept saying, "And Mom's going to leave me the ranch. She's not going to leave you the ranch." He kind of kept just messing with her about that. And while it was funny, sometimes we are much more worried about what's going to happen days, weeks, and months down the road, and we're not concerned about what's going on right in front of us. Jesus was doing some amazing things in his ministry. Jesus was healing people. He was feeding people. He was teaching like no one had ever taught before. But these guys are much more worried about what's going to happen down the road. Sometimes we focus way too much, and I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on the future. I'm not saying we shouldn't plan. But we sometimes focus way too much about what's going to happen down the road instead of looking at right in front of us. And sometimes what's right in front of us is amazing, but we're so busy looking down the road we don't see what's right in front of us. What are some other ways that we repeat this mistake sometimes? Okay, how do we avoid repeating this mistake? Let's do that one. Yeah, Daniel. Humbleness, absolutely. And I have found that you can either choose to eat humble pie or it will be forced upon you at some point. Humbleness is such an amazing tool. It strikes me as we are here today about my early days in ministry, and Jesus is talking about leadership here. He's talking about what I call out in front leadership. See, some people say you need to lead from behind. But really, you need to lead from out front. You need to be setting the example. You need to be the one who is taking care of things. You have a sign out here on the portico, and it has your service times on it. It has Rayford's phone number on it. It has some information about that. That sign was originally mounted up there by Bill Scoggin, by Bill Davenport, and by John Savage. There's a picture of it floating around somewhere. And I remember when I worked here, Rayford showed me that picture, and he says, "This is the epitome of this leadership." He says, this is what they do. They work together for the people. They lead by example. And so this passage to the Westside Church, I believe, is a very special passage to the Westside Church because you have been led by example. You have been led from out in front and not from behind. No one's behind you screaming orders. The people that lead you from out front, and they give you an example. And your leadership is to be commended for that. I greatly appreciate the leadership here. We can be, yeah. Yeah. That's right, yeah. Kristen? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it really is perspective, isn't it? It really is just changing your perspective sometimes. Um, we went from March, about the middle of March, to about the beginning of October, and Emma was virtual when she was in school. Was virtual. We saw each other every day from the middle of March till about the middle of October. Now, if you have a negative outlook on things, that can be pretty negative. 3 people in a house. I was working from home. April was at home. That can be negative. But I choose to look back on that and think I got to spend about half a year with my daughter every day. Who else is going to get to say that? Someday, and Emma kind of tells us she's tired of being part of history, but someday she's going to be able to tell her children and grandchildren, I remember when I went home for spring break and I didn't go back until October. She's going to be able to remember that. And right now, it's kind of hard for her to see that. But yes, there is so much to say about perspective and about how we view things. And if we will view things in light of that God is in control of everything, those things that we are not in control of will not be as big of a problem for us. They will not be as big of an issue for us. And so I would encourage us to think about our perspective. I would encourage us to be humble. I would encourage us to look to good examples, like the examples that you have here at Westside. And if we're doing those things, we're not going to worry about who's at the right hand. We're not going to worry about who is at the left hand. I'll share with you one more thing. When I left Pearland and moved to Dallas, I was on a staff. I was the 4th man on a 4-man staff. We had a youth minister. We had a Latino minister who worked with our Latino population, and we had an outreach minister. And from day one, none of us cared about what our jobs were. And that's not to say that we weren't doing our jobs, but there was no sense of one-upsmanship. There was no sense of doing things to try to outdo one another or best one another. And that's all well and good. And that's how it should work. But let me tell you a little bit more about that staff that I was working with. One of those men was a lawyer. He had gone through law school. He had a very prestigious job with a law firm that worked with insurance companies. They sued insurance companies. He had a very prestigious job. He had a great life. But he kept volunteering at his congregation with youth. He kept going on retreats and teaching classes and things like that. And finally, the congregation he was at said, would you consider leaving that law practice, that lucrative career, your great expense account and clothing allowance? Would you consider leaving all of that and working for much less money and coming and learning how to be a youth minister? And he did it. He thought about it, he prayed about it, and he did it. Our Latino minister, his name Henry Roncancio. In the Latino Churches of Christ, Henry is what we call a rock star. They love Henry. Henry is from Colombia originally. Henry became a Christian through Sunset, through correspondence courses with Sunset School of Preaching. And he went through the correspondence courses, was convinced he needed to be baptized, put on Christ in baptism, and then started writing the people that were teaching him from afar to come to Colombia. You need to come to Colombia. The field is white unto the harvest. You need to be in Colombia. And so they started working all these things out, and he got them all excited about this, and they got their plane tickets, and they brought themselves over to Colombia, and they were met at the airport by a 12-year-old named Henry Roncancio. He was 12 years old, but he loved the Lord. And so Henry went to Sunset. He got his degree. He is currently working on a master's in divinity. My other coworker, his name was Bert Alexander. Actually, I should say his name was Dr. Bert Alexander. Bert had 2 master's degrees, and he had a doctorate of ministry. Bert was amazing. Bert had been a fence and sprinkler contractor, and he had always been a highly dedicated volunteer in youth work. Went into youth ministry late in life, got his degrees, was our associate minister, outreach minister for 20 years at that congregation. Now, I tell you all that to say I worked with men who were much more highly educated than I am. I worked with men who were more skilled at what they do than I am. But you know what? We never worried about those things. We never allowed those things to interfere with our work because we were committed to being the hands and feet of Jesus in that community. We were committed to being the hands and feet of Jesus in our congregation. And so when we focus on God, when we focus on doing the Lord's work, we're not going to worry about those things that we don't have control over. We're not going to worry about what the letters behind our names are. We're not going to worry about the prestige of our jobs, because we're going to be working for God, and it's the greatest job you'll ever have, working for God. I tell people all the time, I am one of those strange people that knew what they wanted to do early on in life, and I have gotten to do it all of my life. And I am so blessed to be able to do that. Continuing our passage, it says, "It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." How can we carry out that command of Christ in verses 26 through 28 about being that servant and not being served, about leading from behind, as he's talking about it? How can we do that? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Do you? Yeah. Absolutely. That sounds like Acts chapter 2 to me. I mean, if you think about, if we go back to the birth of the church, if you want to know what the church is supposed to look like, go back to Acts, because that's where the church began. In Acts chapter 2, we all know Acts 2:38, repent and be baptized, and you will receive the gift of the Holy Spirit. But what we sometimes forget is when you keep reading, and it says about 3,000 were added to that number that day, and it says that they had everything in common, that they met together, that they broke bread together, that they had fellowship. I absolutely wear people out with the answer to just about every question being fellowship. People say, well, how can we be a stronger church? Fellowship, spending more time together, being together. How can we help the people in our community? Fellowship, spending time together, going out and working in the community together. How can we raise our children in a world that is so anti-Christian? Fellowship. You spend time with people from the church. Those are who your children's best friends should be, their friends from the Lord's church. I tell people all the time, I have had the same best friend since I was in the first grade, and we met in Bible class. He was the best man in my wedding. If we can ever find a woman that will have him, I will be the best man in his wedding. We are that close to one another. We are as close as brothers, because we are brothers. We are brothers in faith, and we have done things for each other we wouldn't do for just anybody. And we need to be willing to do that. We need to be willing to put others first. Have you noticed how often that Jesus did that? How often do you read that Jesus is performing a miracle, he's feeding thousands of people, he's healing people, and after he's done, he has to go off and be by himself because he's so tired, because he needs to be refreshed, because he needs to be fulfilled. If Jesus were an athlete, we would say that Jesus always left it all out on the field, that he poured out everything that he had for everyone else. And we're supposed to be like Jesus. We are supposed to be the living embodiment of the Word made flesh, Jesus Christ, here on earth. We are supposed to set that example for those around us. So absolutely putting one another first. Paul would say to do good to all, but especially to those of the household of faith. And I love that passage, and I love the fact the Holy Spirit empowered Paul to say especially and not exclusively. We're to do good to all people. That means that when you go to lunch today, and maybe your waitress is having to cover more tables than usual, and maybe she or he does not bring you your food quick enough, or they get your order wrong, or they get your drink wrong, or maybe they spill a drink on you. You say, that's okay. That's what they made clothes dryers for. We don't fuss at those people. It means when you go to Walmart and they don't have what it is that you want, that you don't yell at the person stocking the shelves, because first of all, it's not their fault anyway. But secondly, what does it say about your ability to share Christ with that person if you've just yelled at that person, if you've just shown them the worst parts of you? Because you to them are the church. You to them are the Word of God. They may not know it yet, but you to them are the Word of God. And when we don't set that right example, when we don't put others first, then all we do is confirm what they may already believe about the church. Jill? Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
It's not going to happen naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Because our natural part of us is going to think of self.
Mm-hmm.
So it's with purpose that we have to look for opportunities.
Yeah, we have to be actively looking for them. We have to pray and ask God to provide those opportunities. But I warn you, don't ask God for opportunities if you don't plan on taking Him up on them. God will use you. God will absolutely use you in the life of other people. But if you choose not to follow God's will, He'll find somebody else to do His will as well. Ask God for opportunities and then look for those opportunities. One way that we can, I'm going to share with you several ways here in our time remaining that we can do this. I believe the first way that we can carry out this command is that we can remove the plank from our own eye. Jesus said, "You hypocrites, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." There's a lot of times that we want to improve everybody else. We want to make everyone else do things that are right when in our own lives we're not doing the right thing. So let's take the plank out of our own eye to begin with. Secondly, stop focusing on yourself. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. It was tradition during the time of Christ for a Roman soldier to be able to put their pack on a citizen and make them, they had legally had to go with them 1 mile or there were consequences. And Jesus said, hey, go a second mile with them. And I think that there's so many layers to what Jesus says here. It does show a great example and a great witness to go that second mile. But you can get a lot of talking done in 2 miles, and maybe you share with them something that'll change their life. Maybe you, like Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch, talk about some spiritual things. And you may not be the one that brings them to Christ ultimately, but you could be the one that plants the seed in their lives. So go that second mile. Point others to Jesus. Philippians 3:8 says, "Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For His sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I might gain Christ." Point others to Jesus. Don't point them to the good things that you're doing. Point them to the things that Jesus is doing in your life. Point them to the good things that Jesus is doing in your church, in His church that you are blessed to be a part of. And we can do that. I want to thank you for your time today. It's good to be able to be in an auditorium class and actually have some discussion. I was glad we were able to do that today. I look forward to bringing the message to us today. God bless you, and we'll be back together at 10:30.